There's a kind of cold that doesn't bite. It lingers, quiet, watchful, coat collars turned up, chimneys puffing soft ghosts into the sky. In a neighborhood tucked beneath Montreal's winter breath, the snow falls like memory. On a cracked driveway, beneath a bruised blue morning, a small boy shifts through shadows, a puck tapping ahead of his skates. His brothers skate beside him, but it is the boy in the middle, tall for his age, wide-shouldered, silent, who seems to already hear music in this ritual. Not the kind from radios. The kind only the soul hears. Neighbors glance as they pass, half-frosted windows, warm cups steaming, but they do not yet know. Most won't remember the boy they see. A whisper on skates. To them, this is just life being lived. Another Canadian winter and another child with a stick in his hand. But something lingers around him. It's not speed, not power, not yet. It's the way he moves, smooth, without asking permission. The puck obeys instinctively, like it knows it's found its home. He does not smile. He does not shout. But he loves this game. Even if he can't say why. Even if no one else sees what's blooming behind those quiet eyes. Inside the Lemieux home, orange light spills through a basement window. A net tucked between taped walls. Scuffed linoleum littered with makeshift pucks, balled-up socks, bottle caps, dreams. Here, the boy is not only seen, but understood. His father studies him from a corner, pretending to read the newspaper as those wide hands send passes with impossible precision. His brothers cheer, tumble, argue. But he glides through their chaos. A poet in a language he's still learning how to speak. And yet, somehow already fluent. Days turn to seasons. And the seasons are patient. The street games grow quieter in memory, but the sound his skates make, those soft cuts into frozen possibility, never truly leave. This is how every quiet storm begins. Not with thunder, but with breath. Did destiny knock on the Lemieux door? Or did it slip in through the cracks, settling beside Mario's pillow as he dreamed of ice and roars he hadn't heard yet? He didn't know. No one did. But something had arrived, and history was learning how to skate. In the quiet corners of the Lemieux basement, the air carried echoes, not of music, but of something softer. Maybe it was ritual. Maybe it was rhythm. Maybe it was just childhood, stretching wide in a narrow space. The floor was scuffed from years of dreaming. Walls bore tape marks like constellation maps. Sticks leaned in every corner, battle-worn, splintered, sacred. It was never just play. It was worship without words. Two brothers, two voices, one soundtrack of laughter, competition, and the occasional thud of a fallen lamp. Their father stacked couch cushions for goal posts, pretending it was just another Tuesday, pretending he wasn't watching the youngest with something more than pride. Mario hardly spoke, not because he was shy, but because there was more happening inside him than words could carry. Each pass, each pivot, seemed to say more than sentences could manage. He didn't ask for drills, didn't need instructions, he simply moved. Like a river sliding through stone, untrained, yet already eternal. Some kids practice. Mario remembered. He remembered how the puck felt the first time it obeyed. He remembered how silence could hum when the game was right, that stillness in motion as everything slowed, and he saw the passing lane before it opened. The shot before it left the stick. He was still only a boy. But sometimes, boys become myth before they know the word for it. On the streets outside, winter bit gently at lampposts. Neighbors waved. Hockey was everywhere, and somehow, nowhere. But inside that house, a current had started. He never gritted his teeth. Never shouted. Even when he scored. It wasn't apathy. It was calm. Like he already knew there would be more. So many more. While others chased the puck, Mario let it come. It returned, like something finding its source. There is a moment in every artist's life, not when they become great, but when they realize they're creating something only they can create. Even as a child, Mario's game felt like jazz from behind closed doors. Soft notes that pulled you closer, and then stayed with you, like a scent or a feeling you couldn't name. He didn't chase applause. He didn't fear silence. He was building something wordless. Each slap shot was a brick. Each backhand a window. Outside, no one knew. The world of headlines and shouting analysts and numbered legacies felt too big, too loud. But inside dusty basements, time moved slowly enough for magic to bloom. At school, he blended in. He wasn't loud in class. Wasn't the fastest runner or boldest voice. But something flickered beneath the surface, that quiet knowing some kids carry. The ones who don't stand in the spotlight, because they are building one of their own. His parents didn't push, they provided space, ice time, warmth. But not pressure. Possibility, left alone, will grow on its own. And Mario grew, tall first, then quiet, then unmistakable. It was in his wrists, how quickly the shot left, how effortlessly the pass curled. His brothers began noticing, then teammates, then scouts. And still, Mario said little. But his hands, they never stopped speaking. There was a rink just outside the city, where the boards were cracked and the lights buzzed like tired insects. Between half-shoveled snowbanks and a door that never quite closed, boys chased dreams in soaked gloves and hand-me-down skates. Among them, tall, composed, near silent, was Mario. He didn't call out for passes. Didn't cheer his goals. He made space where there was none. Drifted through defenders like fog curling through pine. Coaches chalked plays, but Mario played something deeper, something that didn't fit on dry erase boards. He didn't need to demand attention. The puck found him anyway. There's a kind of dominance that doesn't roar. It waits, unmoved, unmoving, until the moment bends forward, asking for direction. That was Mario, the shy storm. Reporters started to appear, clutching notepads, squinting for quotes. Where'd he learn that move? He didn't answer. His teammates laughed, nudged him, tried to draw stories from him after practice. Still, he'd just skate quietly, packing gear in methodical silence, never lingering long. But on the ice, there was no hesitation. Glides sharp as surgery. Stick handling like whispered language. He didn't play with anger or swagger. He played like the game belonged to him before he ever laced a skate. Some nights, his stats looked like misprints. 5 points. 6. 8. The coaches couldn't explain it. The opponents couldn't stop it. The scouts could barely believe it. And yet, he walked the hallways of school like no one at all. No Letterman jacket. No entourage. Just a tall kid with quiet eyes and a lunch they never saw him eat. There's a burden in being exceptional when you never looked for it. Other players wanted the spotlight. Mario never even faced it. Occasionally there would be moments. A post-game puff of warmth when a teammate teased him into a grin, or his father's proud squeeze behind the wheel after practice. But mostly, he watched. Learned. Prepared. In moments of pressure, he didn't tighten, he softened. The puck stayed with him longer than made sense, like even it was seduced by the calm. Fans started saying his name. Whispers near concession stands. Murmurs in community centers. Parents turning to each other after watching him play. Did you see that? As the tournaments stacked and the questions grew, some wondered if the quiet was nerves. If he was unsure. But it never showed on the ice. Because there, he didn't have to talk. He just translated. He took the chaos of the game and made it gentler. Slower. Lovelier. And though the world didn't know it yet, he was already changing hockey, one silent, perfect carry at a time. There was a town by the river where winters came early and left late. Rimouski sat quietly on the map. But inside its modest rinks and snow-dusted streets, a storm was building. They gave him number 66. Not because it meant anything yet, but because even numbers seemed curious to see what he'd do with them. The QMJHL wasn't supposed to be easy. But Mario made it look like a game beneath a streetlight. Effortless. Not careless, just unburdened. Nights blurred into stat sheets stained with disbelief. 4-point games. 5, 10. He floated across center ice like the puck was pulling him, not the other way around. And people came, first from nearby towns, then from hours away. Folding chairs packed against glass, hushed like church just before the hymn. Even as he toyed with records, his eyes never searched for praise. Some nights, it wasn't clear if he even heard the crowd. Mario wasn't pretending to be humble. He simply didn't need the noise. He needed the game, just the game. Coaches whispered about his ceiling, but he kept looking at the ice, not the future. He found joy there, most days. But sometimes when the locker room emptied and reporters reached for answers he hadn't prepared, there was a weight in his silence. People wanted him to smile more, to celebrate louder, to talk bigger, but he wasn't built for that. He just played, and the game bent around him. There were whispers of selfishness when he stayed on long shifts, chasing milestones. But they didn't see the late practices. The pain he never named. The responsibility he never asked for pressing against his ribs. Each goal wasn't for adoration. Each assist wasn't for legacy. It was rhythm, something old and almost sacred. And when a song like that plays, you don't stop at mid-verse. They say he didn't enjoy interviews. But really, the questions were too small for what he felt. What does your success mean to you? He didn't know. He just wanted to feel the cold air through his helmet, the glide of blade over fresh ice, the way time seemed to slow when he had the puck. Some nights, he stayed behind after everyone had left. Not for practice, just to move, to remember why he loved it before numbers and scouts rearranged the silence. He wasn't aiming to change the world of hockey. He just didn't know how to be less than himself. And that, more than stats, more than goals, was what made the game tremble a little when he touched it. June 9, 1984. In a ballroom lined with folding chairs and uncertain futures, the Pittsburgh Penguins made a choice. Their money was thinning, their fans, fewer each winter. The franchise teetered in the silence between irrelevance and extinction. And yet, they used the first overall pick to draft a boy from Montreal. Mario Lemieux, 6'4", still growing. English soft on his tongue, skates loud on the ice. Some called it a miracle. Others called it a gamble. But Pittsburgh was past caution. It needed saving, and sometimes salvation arrives with little warning, and less fanfare. Mario didn't smile for the cameras. Didn't flip his cap backward or crack jokes into microphones. He shook hands. Accepted the jersey, number 66, a mirror flipped to the sport's most famous digits. He didn't pick it for symbolism. There was no thunderclap of drama. Just a quiet number for a quiet man. Pittsburgh, known best for steel and sorrow, looked at him with guarded hope. Hockey was not beloved here, not really. The team had flirted with success, but mostly with survival. The Civic Arena stayed half empty. The bones of a city still recovering from lost industry weren't moved easily by promise. But something in the air began to hum. Not loud, just enough. Mario didn't promise championships. He barely spoke, but he showed up, moved through practices with the same elegant detachment he'd carried through Rimouski's cold rinks. His first interviews were short, measured. The phrases his English could carry were simple, almost delicate. But his hands, they told stories he didn't yet have the words for. A new city, a new language, a burden no teenager deserved. But he bore it without complaint. Because somewhere deep beneath the surface, Mario understood. The game was the same. No matter the colors, no matter the crowd. Just him, a sheet of ice, and a puck that always seemed to return. Behind the scenes, Ownership whispered about limping into another season. Bankruptcy brushed at the edges of headlines, and fans passed rumor like cold coffee, unwelcome but necessary. Mario couldn't change any of that yet, but he practiced like a man asked to repaint the walls of a forgotten church. Quietly, thoroughly, with unintended grace, the Penguins began printing jerseys with his name. In the corners of the team store, kids began to pause a little longer, tugging on sleeves, pointing to the sixes. There wasn't belief yet, not exactly, but the frost had started to thaw. Change doesn't always arrive roaring. Sometimes it enters in borrowed suits, quietly shaking hands at a podium. And instead of making promises, just laces up. He stood at the bench, helmet snug, eyes unhurried. No ceremony, no speech, just the press of blade to ice, and the beginning of something the game hadn't quite prepared for. His very first NHL shift. 5 seconds later, his very first NHL goal. He did not raise his stick, did not thump his chest. He skated back toward the bench with the same quiet grace of someone returning home. And maybe, in his own way, he was. Because it wasn't about announcement. It was permission, to watch, to listen, to feel what hockey could be when moved by something other than force. He didn't tower over the league, not yet. But his presence touched every corner of the ice, like perfume in still air. Subtle, lingering, irrefutable. Every pass had purpose, but none of it felt efforted. Like Mozart, not practicing, but remembering. They say rookies need time. They'd trip over blue lines. Miss defensive assignments. Get benched to learn the language. But Mario? He answered in full sentences, on the ice, before they knew the questions. There was a sequence, weeks into the season. He picked up the puck behind his own net, glided past 3 defenders without losing breath, and fed a perfect pass to a trailing winger who couldn't believe it found his stick. His coach just blinked. There were no diagrams for that. Just the quiet fact of it. Veterans watched from across the league, some amused, others unsettled. There was no bravado, no noise, but points began to stack. Assists that looked like premonitions. Goals that seemed drawn, gently, from the spaces between other men's reach. He wasn't flashy. He didn't toe drag for applause. But he played with an elegance that arrived like dusk, suddenly, then everywhere. In locker rooms, his English grew. His shoulders squared, his kindness stayed, and the town, long gray in mood and memory, began to stir. Children lingered at the edge of Civic Arena, cold toes against concrete, waiting for a glimpse. Inside, the seats filled faster. Not because he roared, but because he whispered, and the game listened. He didn't become a hype. He became a hush, a signal that something sacred had returned to the sport. Not just skill, but something like poetry. There was another number, already carved into the spine of the sport. 99, the great one, Wayne, the name spoken like reverence, like inevitability. Every young star skated in his shadow. And now, so did Mario. Whenever he pulled off a move that made crowds hush then howl, the same question followed. But is he as good as Gretzky? It wasn't asked cruelly, just constantly. As if Mario's brilliance had to pass through another man's mirror to be seen. He didn't answer, not with words. He kept playing, gliding with that same cathedral calm. Eyes scanning possibilities few others knew existed. Wayne was flash, maps and milestones. Mario was fog, quiet, swallowing landmarks whole before anyone noticed. The media never let it breathe. Tension sells. Dichotomy writes itself. So they forced Mario into a contest he didn't enter. He had no posters on his wall growing up. No, someday I'll be like, legends in his voice. Only the game, the way it felt in his fingers. The way silence wrapped itself around his blade. Still, the pressure loomed. Each matchup with Edmonton was heralded not as a game, but as a test. Wayne versus the air. East against west. Flare against flow. And Mario? He skated the same. Didn't hype. Didn't duck. Once, in a game tight with tension, he danced past 3 Oilers and lifted a backhand like it weighed nothing, bar down, clean, unspeakable. Even the Edmonton bench went still. But after the buzzer, when cameras came hunting for quotes, Mario offered only a shrug. He wasn't pursuing supremacy. He was telling his own story, in chapters softer than the league was used to. Wayne chased records with joy. And why not? He'd earned them. But Mario, he never seemed to chase. He let things arrive. And they did. Points tallied. Trophies lined shelves. Coaches looked for answers in his film and found only mysteries. But still, comparison clung to him. As though being himself wasn't enough, unless it measured longer than someone else's legend. But on the ice, he never looked over his shoulder. Only forward. Only ever forward. Because while the world watched 2 giants on a scale, Mario was building a cathedral neither rivalry nor record could contain. He wasn't trying to eclipse the sun. He was becoming the moon. Unafraid of shadows. Quiet. Luminous. Steel towns don't soften easily. They are built from furnace and echo, from torn gloves and long shifts. Pittsburgh was no different, a city shaped by soot and sweat, with winter always near the doorstep. Hockey had flirted with its heart but never held it. Until Mario. He arrived with quiet shoulders, and the city didn't quite know what to make of him. Not loud enough to parade. Not bold enough to demand belief. Just a tall young man with smooth hands and a gaze that seemed fixed on somewhere gentler. But slowly, like rust giving way to shine, things began to change. Not all at once, not with headline-making declarations, but with gestures. Off the ice, he wandered hospital halls when no one asked him to. Signed sticks for children who didn't know his stat line. Sat bedside with parents too scared to cry. He didn't do it for the cameras. Most times, there weren't any. Because that's not how Mario stitched himself into the city. He didn't show up like thunder. He settled like snow. What was once a city of steelers and steelwork, started making room for something else. At first, it was questions over dinner tables. Did you see what that Lemieux kid did last night? Then it became something warmer. A mural on a coffee shop wall. A number 66 jersey hanging in the back of an auto shop. And over time, something Pittsburgh always guarded started loosening. Trust. They didn't cheer because he was theirs. He became theirs because he made them feel. Not like an escape, but like coming home. He didn't speak fluent English when he arrived, but his game translated. And as he got better, so did the Penguins. The Civic Arena wasn't just a roof above ice anymore, it became a place for awe. And Mario, he didn't seek the affection. He just never flinched from it. Sometimes he'd glance up during warm-ups, see a child with scars behind the glass, trying to mimic his wrist flick. He'd nod, softly, but that was enough. A quiet thank you, a kind of communion. In this city of blunt hands and dry humor, where applause came second to resilience, Mario did the rarest of things. He softened them, not through speeches, but through presence. He didn't promise wins. He gave them wonder. And in exchange, they gave him what even legends don't always receive. They gave him their love. There was a stretch of years where Mario didn't just play hockey. He composed it. Each rush up ice was a stanza. Each dicky, a pause. A breath between lines. The game slowed around him, not because he asked it to, but because it wanted to see what he'd do. Other players sprinted, shuttled, scrambled. Mario waited, not idly, intuitively. He saw seams before they existed. Threw passes into silence, knowing his teammate would arrive. They called it vision, but it felt closer to prophecy. Every touch of the puck bent the rhythm of the rink, not broken, just reimagined. More fluid, more certain. The plays he made couldn't be diagrammed, only felt. Opponents tried to track him. But how do you chase someone without footsteps? He didn't always take over games with flash or roar. Sometimes, he'd thread the softest pass. A near whisper, split through 3 sticks and 2 doubts. And suddenly, a goal. He created space that didn't exist. Time that wasn't there. He'd float behind the net, patient, motionless, and then, in an instant, lay a puck on someone's tape like placing a glass on a table without a ripple. It looked easy. Dangerous, what that ease did to others. He made defenders question basics. Made goalies blink. Made ice feel like stage. There was one night, another 4-point performance, where a veteran winger said, between swigs of water, he's painting out there. No one disagreed. And still, he rarely raised his stick. Even at his peak, joy didn't explode from him. It simmered. He loved the game too much to mock it with noise. During warm-ups, he'd glide without expression. Then, later, drop a no-look pass through the legs of 2 players, as if playing a different version of the same sport. Line mates began to wait longer with the puck. They trusted him, trusted that if they didn't rush, magic might have time to arrive. And often, it did. He wasn't just scoring, he was transforming. After games, reporters asked, "Do you realize what you did out there?" He'd shrug, say it was a team effort. That he got lucky. But luck doesn't move that way. Luck doesn't cradle the puck like a violin bow. What Mario had wasn't luck. It was awareness. An ability to translate speed into serenity. Chaos into design. And in those seasons, their prime years, frozen like perfect amber, he showed what the game could become when played without fear, and without ego. A gift shared, but not shouted. He gave fans not just goals, but glimpses of what sport could be when left in the hands of an artist. There's a kind of pain the cameras never catch. It doesn't come from a single hit. There's no blood, no limp, just a slow, steady ache that waits. Mario began to feel it in the mornings. A stiffness in the lower back. A hesitation that hadn't been there before. At first, he ignored it. Stretch a little longer. Skate it off. That's what athletes do. But some aches don't wear jerseys. They live in shadows. Quiet, constant companions. It got harder to tie skates. Harder to stand between shifts without wincing. Still, he didn't complain. The game meant too much. And silence had always been his language. He hid it well. Until he couldn't. The fluidity started to break. Small cracks in the music. He missed games. Then more games. Treatment followed, traction tables, injections, ice baths, ultrasounds. Nothing made the voice in his spine go quiet. Reporters asked questions. He gave short answers. There's some tightness. Just being careful. Day to day. But the truth was heavier. Doctors saw things on scans. Words like chronic and degenerative entered the room like uninvited guests. The team managed his minutes. They pulled him out of back-to-backs. Let him rest between brilliance. But fans didn't see the hours on clinic tables. Teammates didn't hear the nights spent awake, backlit hot and unforgiving. The world only saw glimpses. A slower shift. A wince in the corner. And yet, he kept coming back. Because he knew the ice better than he knew rest. On the nights he played, he looked effortless. On the mornings after, he felt ancient. Sometimes, pain becomes part of the ritual. He didn't lash out, didn't rage against it. He let it move beside him. A second player, unseen, shadowing each stride. He learned to breathe through it. To time his brilliance in smaller windows. A 2-minute stretch here. A third period miracle there. It was enough. Not because it cured him. But because it reminded everyone who he was. He rewrote what dominance could look like. Not sustained, but searing. Not endless, but unforgettable. Each shift was a gamble. Each goal a rebellion. Back issues robbed him of comfort. But never of grace. Even when his body said no. His hands whispered yes, and when the crowd roared, he didn't celebrate. He exhaled, because surviving the game had become part of playing it. No headlines knew this chapter. No trophies told of the cost. But in every shortened stride, every grimace hidden behind a visor, there was a quiet defiance. A vow that beauty doesn't vanish when it hurts. It just deepens. It began with fatigue, not the kind from overtraining. Not the familiar ache in his back or the stiffness from bus rides between games. This felt different, deeper. He'd finish practice and still feel winded hours later. Sweat lingered on his skin longer than it should. The cold came faster, stayed longer. Something was wrong. And then, confirmation. A phone call. A word that doesn't belong in locker rooms. Hodgkin's lymphoma. The poetry of his game shattered against it. The silence that had carried him all these years grew heavier. He was 27, at his peak, skating through record books, and suddenly his own body had turned enemy. There was no stat for this. No highlight reel to soften its blow. But still, he didn't flinch. He faced cameras with gravity in his voice but no self-pity. He answered questions meant for older men. Wiser men. Men prepared for mortality. No athlete is ever ready. But he stood before the world, pale beneath arena lights, and named his disease. Not to surrender, but to strip it of mystery. In Pittsburgh, everything stopped. Steelworkers paused during shifts. Storefronts taped number 66 signs in their windows. This wasn't about hockey anymore. This was family, illness, survival. The city held its breath. And Mario? He kept moving. On treatment days, he sat beneath harsh hospital bulbs while nurses whispered encouragement. Radiation ran through him like winter. Nausea stole his voice. Appetite vanished. Weight dropped. But not will. He'd built a life of quiet perseverance. Now, he leaned into it. Hard. Not loudly. Not publicly, but with all the force of someone who knew how to endure pain without theater. Teammates sent messages, awkward, heartfelt. Coaches stopped drawing lines on boards, unsure what came next. A legend was fighting, not for points, for breath. Somewhere between appointments, his skates stayed nearby. He told no one, but visualized plays in his head. Remembered how the puck felt on his blade. Imagined returns. Returns felt impossible, but so had everything else he'd already done. There's something unspoken in the soul of a competitor. A refusal to let endings write themselves. So he waited. He healed. Not all at once, but steadily. Treatment ended. Hair thinner. Skin pale. Back still aching. But he laced the skates. Not for spectacle. Not for headlines. For the same reason he'd started. Because he loved the game. And when he stepped back onto the ice, not as a rookie, not even as a star, but as a man who had walked through something darker than dim arenas, the crowd stood. Frozen. Stunned. And then, they wept. Because Mario Lemieux hadn't just returned to hockey. He had just reminded everyone why people returned to hope. He came back on a Wednesday. Not months after finishing treatment. Not weeks after regaining strength. But hours. The date was March 2, 1993. Radiation had drained him. His weight had dipped. He could barely tie his skates some mornings without help. But that night, in Philadelphia, of all places, he laced up. The crowd was hostile. The air thick with rivalry. But not that night. They stood. They applauded. Because even here, where cheers for Mario were rare, they understood what it meant to see him return. Not just to the lineup. To life. He didn't score in the first period. He didn't need to. He was back, pale but determined, still elegant in movement, though maybe a step slower. In the second period, on a power play, he took the puck near the circle, and waited. Then, just as he had before, in those untouched seasons, he found the seam no one else saw. A goal. The bench rose. The announcers stumbled over words. Even the Flyers faithful couldn't find their usual hate. Because you don't boo a heartbeat returning. And then, he kept scoring. Not just that night, that month, that season. He had missed 24 games. 24 chances, gone to chemo and fear. But he didn't slow. He climbed. Point by point, night by night, he rose through the standings. The league watched, then held its breath, because this wasn't supposed to happen. Not after cancer. Not after weight loss and nausea and weeks in hospital gowns. And yet, when April came and the final games closed, he had done it. Scoring title. It wasn't a comeback story. It was a defiance of physics, of medicine, of doubt. At the awards, when his name was called, he walked to the stage in a suit that fit more loosely than before, shoulders thinned but chin high. He thanked his doctors, his teammates, his family, but even then, he didn't weep, didn't revel. It wasn't style, it was survival. Because for Mario, this was never about proving anything. Not records, not comparisons, not revenge against fate. It was about playing, even when every reason not to, stood taller than the boards. Legends are usually built on dominance. He built his again with endurance. And in doing so, gave people something far more valuable than awe. He gave them belief, that joy could return, that pain wasn't forever, that even in the face of something so deeply unfair, a man could fall in love with the game again, and let the world watch as he did. It had been 10 years. 10 winters of lifting a team, of bearing the weight of expectation in a city still learning how to love hockey. 10 seasons of brilliance and bruises, of carrying talent that sometimes felt too heavy for one frame. But on a June night in 1991, Mario finally touched silver. The cup, it didn't erupt in fireworks for him. Not in his face, not in his voice, but something shifted behind his eyes when the trophy met his fingers. A silence that had always walked beside him cracked. Because this moment had nothing left to contain. He didn't scream, didn't leap, but when the commissioner handed him glory wrapped in chrome and myth, he blinked, once, slowly. The kind of quiet that only comes after storms. And suddenly, everything made sense. The injuries, the loneliness, the whispers of doubt, the games played through pain, the clinics visited in secret, the nights limping to the shower when the cameras had all gone home. It had led here, to that lift, 2 hands beneath a trophy. Shoulders that had known burden finally weighted with something that didn't hurt. He skated the slow circle, holding the cup high, not like a claim, but like a thank you. To the game, to the patience, to the perseverance. Pittsburgh didn't just celebrate, it exhaled. Bars spilled out into sidewalks. Children wore his number in chalk on their driveways. Grown men wept in places where emotion had long been a stranger. Because this wasn't about hockey anymore. It was about endurance rewarded. About grace finally mirrored in victory. He had played like no one else. And now, he'd won like no one else. Not by domination alone, but by refusal. Refusal to bend. Refusal to quit. Refusal to let the game define him only through records and rivals. When he hoisted the Conn Smythe trophy, there was no smirk. No gesture. Just tired eyes and earned peace. He had been Lemieux, Mario, Super Mario. Now, he was something else. Not just a star. Not just a savior. He was the anchor of a franchise reborn, the hum beneath a city's anthem. And the boy who once skated in his basement, passing pucks through shadows, he was there, too. Winking from behind every dicky, every assist, every lifted moment wrapped in the roar of fans who now understood. Some storms take a decade to break. But when they do, they don't fall, they rise. The banners still fluttered in the rafters. The photos still hung in homes and barbershops. And Mario still skated. But something had shifted. The sharpness in his stride grew softer. The game, once obedient to his every gesture, began to ask more of him. He wasn't fading, not yet. There were still nights where he danced. Still games where he left defenders chasing memories. Still goals that made grown men forget how to sit still. But what came easy now came with cost. Each shift left a residue. Each collision stayed longer in his bones. He spent more time between games in silence, treatment, recovery, retreat. The Penguins, though, were climbing. Their win banners no longer sagged alone. The team had texture now, depth, chemistry, timing. Around Mario, players bloomed. Yager, with his waterfall of hair and impossible angles. Francis, a compass in the chaos. Stevens, willing to be hammer when Mario played scalpel. Together, they climbed again. Back-to-back seasons of noise and clarity. Of games where doubt never entered the building. In 1992, they repeated. Twice in 2 years, he lifted the cup, not with surprise, but affirmation. This wasn't a team riding a crest. They were anchoring it. Success no longer shocked them. But Mario, he smiled less that second time. Not from emptiness, not from arrogance, but from the quiet realization. This wouldn't last forever. He could feel his back betray him more often now. Tighter turns punished him. Long shifts drained rather than inspired. The joy remained, but so did weariness. He kept his game precise. Economical. Where once he stormed through neutral zones, now he floated, choosing moments carefully, surgically. Less ice. More impact. He wasn't declining. He was refining. But even in refinement, erosion begins. Privately, he started to wonder. How much more could his body bear? Nights became puzzles. How to play full without breaking. He missed parts of seasons. Came back. Disappeared again. Fans didn't boo. They held their breath. Because anyone who watched closely saw it. He was still otherworldly. But he was human now, too. The marvel remained, but mortality had found its place beside him. And maybe that's what made those years even more beautiful. Not because Mario was invincible, but because he kept showing up anyway. There's power in dominance, but there's something holier in resilience. And while the parades rolled and the photos clicked, somewhere behind his tired eyes lived the understanding. He had given the game so much, and it would soon begin to ask for the rest. There was no crescendo, no final game beneath falling confetti, no spotlight chase around the rink. Just a press release, a sentence on paper that whispered louder than any cheer. Mario Lemieux was retiring. He was 31, still capable of brilliance, still able to pull the impossible from thin air. But the weight, of pain, of expectation, of fatigue that bone couldn't bury, had become too much. For years, he had played through whispers in his back and ghosts in his blood. Each shift, a bargain. Each game, a quiet bet against gravity. And still, he had given more than anyone could ask. But heroes aren't infinite. Legends aren't immune. So, when the announcement came, Pittsburgh didn't rage. It held still, like standing at the edge of a dock, watching a ship leave without sails. Knowing it had given you safe passage more times than you deserved. He didn't sob at the podium. Never offered a grand goodbye. He thanked the city, thanked the game, said it was time. No cameras caught him packing up. No documentary followed him into the quiet. But something about his absence rang louder than his presence ever did. The team played on, but the ice looked different, colder. Even in victory, something had dimmed. Because for so long, Mario didn't just play the game. He completed it, and without him, no matter the score. It felt unfinished. Fans still wore his jersey, even on nights he wasn't mentioned. Children still whispered his name before driveway games. And in hospital rooms, where he had once left signed sticks and silent kindness, photos now hung like relics. Proof he had been there. That he had mattered. Teammates spoke carefully when asked about him after. Some said they wished he had stayed longer. But most said, They were just grateful he stayed as long as he did. And Mario? He slipped away like mist. Not bitter, not broken, just tired. After a decade of carrying a franchise, a city, a weight that fame only deepens. He had finally left the ice. But the marks, those quiet, gliding marks, they never melted. He had left the ice, but the shadows of the game still moved through him. Retirement brought rest, but not peace. The Penguins were adrift, sinking in debt, holding closed-door meetings in rooms that echoed more than they answered. Bankruptcy had crept to the threshold. Anonymous buyers circled. Some wanted to relocate the team. Others wanted to dismantle it brick by brick. Pittsburgh held its breath again. But this time, the rescue didn't come from the draft. It came from the past. Mario stepped forward, not in skates, but in suit. Not with a goal to score, but with a franchise to save. His own unpaid salary, millions owed but never seen, became leverage. Equity in a team that no longer had assets, only memories. Memories and the man who had given them. He didn't do it to be a hero. He did it because the thought of this team, the colors, the crest, the echoes of his greatest games, being erased, was unbearable. So he became something new. An owner. The teenager who once entered the civic arena uncertain of English now walked through boardrooms, steady in silence. He met with banks, with lawyers, with city officials, not to relive his greatness but to guard it, to protect what had made the greatness possible. It wasn't glamorous. There were forms to file, negotiations that bled into exhaustion, meetings where he sat, pen in hand, eyes tracing the stakes across spreadsheets. But beneath it all, always, the same instinct. To protect the game, his game, not in theory, in reality. Brick, ice, seat, fan. He met with politicians, urging for community support. Stood behind microphones, not to accept trophies, but to ask for trust. Many gave it, because it was Mario, because they remembered. And slowly, things held. Salaries were renegotiated, ownership structures edited like brittle pages. The team stayed, in Pittsburgh, and not just in name. The arena still echoed with the same tones. The Zamboni still made its quiet orbits. Fans still filled seats, some not knowing how close it had come to vanishing. He never bragged, never called it his. But everyone knew. Had he not acted, the Penguins might have been a line in history books, not a living story. And in that transitional space, between ice and office, between player and protector, he proved something rarer than dominance. He proved devotion, not the kind you shout about. The kind that wakes up early. That signs quietly. That still drives to the arena, even without pads or stick or flame. He was no longer their star. But he had become their guardian. And somehow, that felt even more sacred. He hadn't played in 3 years. His jersey, retired. His name, carved into conversations about greatness. His legacy, already sealed like a letter never meant to be reopened. But the game, it doesn't let go of those who gave it soul. So one day, quietly, without announcement, Mario skated again. No press release foretold it. No marketing blitz, just the slow turning of rumor into reality. 2000, the owner, would play. It sounded like myth, like folklore whispered across frozen ponds. But it was true. He trained alone, at first. Tested the spine that had betrayed him. Listened for the voice that once carried him across the blue line like wind. And when it returned, he followed it. December 27th. The civic arena held its breath. Fathers clutched sons. Mothers wore vintage jerseys. And teammates watched a man reborn step through the tunnel. Not a prospect. Not a comeback kid. But a father, a franchise legend. A name already wrapped around banners. When he stepped on the ice, time folded. He was older now. Slower, maybe. But still. That glide. That way the puck found him without needing to be called. As if it had been waiting all these years, too. First game back. Goal. Assist. Another assist. 3 points in a single night. Not out of nostalgia, but out of command. He didn't grin wide, didn't search for celebration, just nodded, soft, quiet, as if the world had righted itself. Questions followed. Could he do this full-time? Was this temporary poetry, or the start of a new stanza? But he wasn't chasing youth. He was answering a call. He played alongside boys who had posters of him growing up. They didn't dare ask for advice. He gave it anyway, with his blade, with presence, with the whisper of genius given back, freely. He played for another season. Then parts of another. Still made magic. A behind-the-net pass that hummed. A fake that sent a goaltender reaching for something that wasn't there. Old, now? Maybe. But only in age, not in awe. Fans didn't chant this return. They marveled at it, quietly. Because it wasn't a second career. It was something rarer. A gift reopened, not out of need, but out of love. He came to live with them when he was still just a boy. 17, they said. A prodigy. The weight of a franchise forming behind his shoulders. Sidney Crosby, they called him. But beneath the headlines and camera lights, he was just Sid. Nervous. Curious. Carrying the same quiet questions Mario once carried. What does greatness feel like when it's still unfamiliar? How do you carry a city without dropping parts of yourself? So Mario made space, not just in his home, but in his rhythm. He offered breakfast without fanfare. Corner conversations instead of lectures. Little gestures that told a young man, "You're safe here." This wasn't mentorship assigned. It was legacy offered. Less instruction, more example. Sid watched how Mario carried silence, how he answered pressure without crumbling, how he stayed soft where others hardened. And in the stillness of those winter evenings, somewhere between games on TV and driveway echoes, something passed between them. Not a formula, not a secret, a way. After practices, Sid would ask a small question. How do you slow the game down? Mario wouldn't diagram. He'd smile. You don't. He'd murmur. You rise above it. Some nights, they didn't talk hockey at all. Just music. Montreal weather. Family. Things bigger than the rink. Mario knew what attention could do to a soul too young. So he didn't shield Sid from it. He calibrated the noise. Let him breathe inside fame's growing shadow. And still, whenever Sid stepped out the door, the world saw only expectation. But Mario had built him a quiet inside that chaos. A sturdiness. Not from speeches. From presence. And as the years unfurled, Sid didn't just become great. He became gracious. Measured. Fierce without cruelty. Brilliant without need for spotlight. You could trace his passes with your eyes, but if you listened closely, you could sometimes hear the echo of an older wrist guiding the motion. Not directing, just reminding, because legacy isn't about the trophies. It's about the tone that survives you. The humility you plant in someone else's path. And for Mario, it was never about building monuments. It was about growing gardens. And Sidney Crosby was the proof. That greatness taught gently, lasts longer. There was no farewell tour. No final arena curtain. No spotlight lingering too long on center ice. No scripted handwave or looping tribute videos stretched between whistles. He left as he had always arrived. Quietly. The skates came off. The locker was emptied. The number stayed, but the man moved somewhere just beyond reach. No interviews announced his decision. No press conference carved it into stone. One day, Mario Lemieux simply wasn't in the lineup. And Pittsburgh, instinctively, understood. He had said no before. Come back. Saved more than the game. He saved the team. But this time, it felt final. Age wasn't the enemy. Nor injury. Not even time. He had given everything the game had asked. And then, somehow, he gave more. So when retirement settled, for good, the city did what he had always done first. It stayed silent, and then, slowly, it began to build him something. Not in words, in bronze. On a quiet patch outside the arena he once lifted to life, artisans traced his posture, frame, presence. Not with flourish, with understanding. They didn't sculpt his celebration. They sculpted the moment just before. Head low, puck close. Two defenders reaching, always a blink too late. Balance in tension, grace beneath weight. That's what people remembered most. Not just what he did, but how he did it. When the statue was unveiled, people gathered not to shout, but to reflect. Parents raised children onto shoulders, explaining a name the young ones had only seen on highlight reels and stitched jerseys. There, they'd say, pointing to the stillness captured in form. That's what the game used to feel like. And quietly, as snow settled against polished metal, it became clear. Statues are not for victory alone. They're for presence, for what stays after the skates have stopped carving. Because what Mario gave could not fully be measured in goals or banners. It lived in the breath held between plays, the calm between chaos, the grace of someone who never needed to raise his voice to be heard. Now, strangers walk past him every day, the frozen version. Some pause, some don't, but all, in some way, pass through him. As if some part of the game still guards that door. And maybe it does. Maybe he does. Still here. Still watching. Still reminding the city that once, the quietest man in the arena taught the game how to speak without noise. There's a silence in empty arenas. Not loneliness, something gentler. Familiar. A faint hum lingering in rafters, in the space between echoes. As though the boards remember. As though somewhere, behind all the noise that once filled them, the game is still whispering his name. Mario. Not in chant, not in roar, but like wind brushing against memory. The banners still speak, the footage still stirs, stats remain inked in permanence. But his legacy lives quieter than all of that. It lives in how young hands now hold their sticks. In the way a pass is given without looking. In the patience before a shot. In the kindness exchanged in moments far from cameras. These are not skills alone. They are echoes, remnants of a man who showed that greatness need not be loud. To be lasting, his gifts were never just goals or figures. They were reminders of what excellence looks like when uncluttered by ego. What gentleness can do when wedded to ferocity. What stillness means in a world that rarely stops moving. He didn't just play different. He led different, gave different, and when he left the game, truly left it, the silence wasn't emptiness. It was reverence, a space held for someone who had never craved center stage, but earned it anyway. Now, children who never watched him in real time still know his name. Not from commercials, from bedtime stories, from their parents' eyes when they say, "Let me show you one more clip." They watch him skate, and for a moment, time returns. The ice glows again with possibility. Defenders fall away. The puck settles like it belongs nowhere else. And a boy who moved like moonlight moves again. Not for himself, for them, because some legends aren't meant to blaze. They are meant to glow, quiet, constant, and eternal. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful thing a man can do with all his talent is be kind, is be humble, is stay, and in that staying, leave behind something far more rare than records. A feeling that the game you love is still sacred, and always will be.